Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. Well, last weekend we were treated to the sunny spectacle of the G7 leaders meeting on a beach in Cornwall. This was significant, of course, because it was the first visit of President Biden to Europe, where he can form new working relationships with his counterparts from Europe and from Canada and Japan. It was also the first in-person meeting of these leaders, having been locked in through video conferences during the COVID-19 crisis. It was also a chance, after a year of highly nationalist and protectionist policies in dealing with the pandemic, for the leaders of the G7 to adopt a more cooperative stance of helping the rest of the world and not just helping themselves. Biden came declaring that America is back, but he tried to do more than just say this by suggesting that the G7 could be the hub of a new alliance of democracies standing up to the authoritarians. That's the narrative that he has framed for the rest of the 21st century. And to underscore this, four democratic countries outside the G7, India, South Korea, South Africa, and Australia, were invited to participate in the sessions. Not going to be easy to disinvite them in the future, I think. Boris Johnson and Biden also tried to set the tone of the Alliance of Democracies early on by signing a new Atlantic Charter. This recalls the 1941 document between Churchill and Roosevelt on a British ship off the coast of Canada that prefigured the end of fascism and the building of the great multinational institutions of the post-war world. But the G7, of course, has been criticized quite a lot recently. Number one, for not being representative, of course. The G20, which includes far more of the major powers, was key to handling the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And the G7 has been accused for coming up with lots of announcements, which please the media. Politicians love these, but then being a little bit thin when it comes to delivery on the resources. For instance, back in 2009, it pledged to devote $100 billion in climate finance to the poorer countries and still hasn't done so. Indeed, it repledged to do it yet again in Cornwall last Sunday. Now, if the G7 is going to be a viable institution, it needs to do two things. First, it has to rebuild prosperity, build trade and economic exchanges among the member states. Secondly, it has to be a leader in reaching out to the rest of the world in solving global challenges. On the first count, there was some progress in terms of agreeing a 15% tax on multinational corporations to ensure that they can't hide their profits away in tax havens. But there wasn't very much when it came to new trade pacts. The US President Biden still seems quite reluctant to go down that particular road, given Buy America sentiment back in the United States. And although there have been some good indications of the EU and the US working together on aircraft or steel subsidies, aluminium, there's still a great deal to do in opening up services and the digital economy across the Atlantic. So attention turned to what the G7 can offer the rest of the world. Two big themes here. Number one, of course, was the pandemic. The G7 promised 1 billion vaccines to the poorer countries to be delivered by the end of next year. Biden offered 500, the EU 100 million extra, and the UK also 100 million extra. Now, this is good news, but unfortunately, the World Health Organization and the Secretary General of UN have pointed out that we need 11 billion doses to really get on top of the virus, and we need these now, not at the end of 2022, particularly if we're going to prevent an upsurge in Africa and new dangerous variants from emerging. The G7 pledged to set up a global early warning system to detect pandemics better and earlier, and also a better tracking and analysis system for pathogens. It pledged also to help developing countries to improve their domestic production of vaccines and to reform the World Health Organization. But given the dimensions of the crisis, was this too little, too late? On climate change, the G7 leaders reiterated their commitment to a carbon-free economy by mid-century. This is a good lead into the COP26 meeting in Glasgow in November. They promised to stop subsidizing fossil fuel projects in their foreign aid programs and to ring fence 30% of the world's land and 30% of the world's oceans for the protection of biodiversity. There was also mention of China, critical in terms of China's abuse of human rights and its market manipulations when it comes to dumping its products on international markets. Particularly, Beijing reacted quite fiercely to that criticism, declaring that the G7 was obsolete. But it does show that inevitably, as the democracies come together against the authoritarians, they will only provoke those authoritarians and deepen the divisions. How we overcome them is going to be, of course, the key question for the future. So in a nutshell, as the G7 departed on Sunday evening, did they do enough to make themselves the new global hub of the democracies? Well, we'll see if they deliver. That's going to be the starting point. We'll see if they are able to attract other countries to participate in future. We'll see if they can carry their initiatives into the G20 and into other international institutions for implementation. It's a worthy effort, but my sense is it's going to take a lot more than a nice barbecue on a sunny beach in Cornwall in the presence of the royal family before we know the definitive answer to that particular question. Thanks for watching and listening this week. Look forward, as always, to seeing you again on the screen next week.